I want to welcome you all here. Good afternoon. My name is Gina Stevens. I'm the Director of Mortgage Broker Conduct at FSRA. Thank you folks for joining us in person, and for those of you that are online, welcome. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this is being taped. That includes our panelists. This is being taped. And there's simultaneous French translation for anyone who needs it. So if you're in the room and you would like a headset for simultaneous translation, just put up your hand and our staff will come and meet you there. For those of you online that are attending virtually, you can click the initials at the top right corner of your screen and you can select set language to listen to this session in French. We will be taking questions at the end of the session through the conference site, so we don't have mics going around, but we will be taking questions that are fed through the Chime app. If for some reason you're here and you're having difficulty connecting to the app, you can always flag down a FSRA staff member and give them your question directly, and they'll feed it into the app for the folks that are supporting us in the back. Thank you. So now let me introduce our expert panel. I'm sure that many of these folks do not need an introduction, but nonetheless, I will give you a short introduction. I encourage you to look at their full bios that are on the FSRA event page, but to save us some time to get into some juicy conversation, we're gonna do a short introduction and then launch right in. So I'm joined today by Dong Lee. He is the former principal broker of Mortgage Architects and also the former president and COO of DLC Group of Companies. Most recently, Dong became the CEO of Axiom Innovations. It's one of Canada's largest independent point-of-sale platforms. Dong is joined by Carrie Reid. She is the principal broker and partner at Premier Mortgage Centre. I'm also joined by Sadiq, right beside me here, who is the principal broker and CEO of Approved Financial Services. And last but not least, in terms of our industry participants, Ron Butler is here from Butler Mortgage, and you may know him also as the star of the Angry Mortgage podcast. I am also joined by Antoinette. She's the head of financial institutions and mortgage brokerage conduct at FSRA, my boss, so no pressure. We're here this afternoon to discuss something that is very topical. It couldn't be more timely in terms of some of the concerns that FSRA is seeing in the marketplace that some of the speakers earlier today mentioned. Interest rates are very high, housing prices are high, most homeowners are seeing huge jumps in their mortgage payments, and it's getting more and more difficult for consumers to find affordable mortgage solutions when they're looking to buy a home. So it's really critical for the mortgage broker sector. The advice and the services that you provide to your clients has never been more important. But in this context, FSRA is increasingly concerned about, number one, protecting consumers. I think you've heard that through all the sessions today. Ensuring that mortgage brokers are keeping their clients' interests top of mind, and most importantly, making sure that consumers and investors are receiving mortgage product recommendations that are suitable for their specific needs and circumstances. So one of FSRA's stated priorities this year, in keeping with this session, is to develop and release guidance that is going to enhance principal broker effectiveness. We've been working really hard on this proposed guidance, and once it's ready to be published, we're very much looking forward to your feedback on this topical subject that is going to really address some of the issues that we talk about with our guests here today. So without further ado, I'd like to launch into the discussion that we're here to participate in, creating and supporting a strong conduct culture in mortgage brokerages. So I want to begin with a question, if I can direct it, to Sadiq. Sadiq, how have you changed your approach to setting the right tone from the top as we've seen the economic fundamentals changing, now that we're seeing some of the issues that I pointed out earlier, higher interest rates, greater difficulty for consumers in qualifying for mortgages, low housing supply? This is the kind of environment where you see people wanting to cut corners because their volumes are getting lower. You know, how do you deal with that in your mortgage brokerage?
So I'd say on the compliance standpoint, not much has really changed because we've always had a very strong focus on compliance. We've always, put the emphasis on doing what's right for the client. Where things have changed in the past, we would be looking kind of more of the meeting the immediate need of the client. Now that the immediate need has kind of become twofold. We're looking at the short-term, 2 to 3 year goal of the client, the longer prospects of where rates can go into 5 years. So looking at, how do we balance clients' affordability with their desire for lower rates? So looking at, putting them into a shorter-term product that would, still be affordable while giving them flexibility to exit from that product should rates eventually come down. I think that's one of the biggest concerns on homeowners' minds right now. And what we've done with that is we've focused on assessing all possible options, opening up, all the discussions into different types of products, different ways of how they can balance their finances, and how we can help them kind of plan for those changes, regardless of which way the market goes, to give them more flexibility. And I think that's the key to it, is really the discussion. And it's not us pushing a solution onto the client. It's more collaboration with the client so that they feel involved and they feel confident in the direction of how their mortgage and how their finances is heading.
And those types of conversations are really how you determine suitability, and you make sure that you have the information you need to find a product that's suitable for that person in front of you, that's going to last through this period of economic change.
Yeah, hands down, it's suitability, reasonability, and depending on the type of mortgage, exit strategy. And that's kind of the 3 fundamentals that we look at with every single client.
That's great. I'm going to actually ask Carrie to chime in if she has any different approaches in your brokerage. I know your brokerage is quite large, so just to see if you have anything to add to what Sadiq has mentioned to us.
I think the focus, along with Sadiq's brokerage, the focus is about ensuring that the agents and brokers have confidence when they're talking to clients and the needs and wants of those clients. So there are some very dramatic changes, interest rates, lack of housing, even affordability of the housing that they currently own, right? So we've spent a significant amount of time training and informing the agents and the brokers of what these changes mean in their own portfolios of business, right? Their own book of business, actually drilling it right down to how is this going to impact your clients. We've brought in and encourage and continue to train, bring in the experts on alternative products, different strategies. I'm not going to claim to be the expert for everybody, and neither will the rest of the leadership team at Premier Mortgage Center, but we encourage the sharing is caring model, right? Which is bring in the people that can talk with the agents and brokers to give them the confidence to build the strategies with their clients, right? Providing solutions that are actually going to bring the result that everyone's looking for, right? We're not just throwing them into something. There's a lot of training involved in the last year or 2 years. A lot of agents and brokers were kind of just walking the path every day, right? It was an easy path to walk, and it's not today. So it was really important for us, and it remains top of the list, to ensure that the information is available to the agents and brokers. They understand the information, they know what's available. We're training to it, and they can provide strategies that their clients are actually going to benefit from.
So to Carrie's point, it's a reminder of the story of a mortgage broker who, in the midst of all the interest rate hikes, did something brave and courageous. She emailed all of her variable rate customers and said, if you want to have a conversation, please book some time with me on my Calendly app. She got booked for the entire month. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, I said, were you scared? She goes, I was terrified about the comments you get back. How could you dare put me into a variable rate mortgage? It's the worst decision of my life. She said of the 50 conversations she had only one customer came back and was really angry at her. The rest of them were just thankful that she took the time to have that conversation with them, because I think the problem these days is we get so nervous about the conversation we have to have with our customers, when the truth is, if you just get ahead of it, really great things happen. I think that's to Carrie and Sadiq's point, is if we are there to provide advice to the customer, I think there's so many people who are afraid to have that conversation. I think of my financial planner, who didn't once call me through the entire changes to the interest rate environment, and didn't once call me when my portfolio was declining. And so, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things that I think as an industry we're doing a better job with.
I agree. I think, Ron, although you would disagree with mortgage brokers being order takers at times from clients who seem to believe that they know what's best for them, we're now in an environment where we're no longer taking orders or orders aren't being shouted at us from clients. We're now providing solutions. So you just got to have the information, right?
You know, potentially the best concept of this is 2,700 years old. Hippocrates said the first principle would be to do no harm. And that is potentially the most important thing that all of us have to address, and particularly a regulator has to address, is mistakes can be made, markets can change, people have bad judgment sometimes about what particular product or what particular term. But the most important element when dealing with a consumer, some of them are very sophisticated and some of them are very unsophisticated. So the most important element is do no harm. Come from a place where you want to do the best for the consumer. And then we have to find the people who want to do harm, and we have to get them out of the business.
So just to follow up on that, Ron, with you, because I think as the panelists have already noted, the margin for error now, given the economic fundamentals have changed, is much narrower. So previous to this, in a hot market, people could be putting consumers into mortgages and they had lots of room to maneuver. Interest rates were low, but now with interest rates being so high, it's very hard to qualify for a mortgage. Some people are getting into mortgages that are very unusual, like private mortgages that have unusual terms that consumers are not used to. What kind of methods do you use in your brokerage to communicate your conduct expectations, especially when it comes to new agents? So these are new agents that are just out there starting to operate, and it's much easier these days to put someone in a mortgage product that's not going to work for them if you don't collect enough information, and if you don't have those very in-depth conversations with your clients. So what kind of methods do you use with new agents when you hire them to make sure that they're living up to the expectations that you have for your brand?
Well, sometimes the best thing to do is just say no. It's true in all parts of life. That brings me to mind something we're seeing on social media right now, where mortgage agents are promoting the idea of a $1.7 million property purchase where you only put 5% down because it's fractional ownership with other parties, which will without doubt have a horrible result eventually. But yet it's out there. So the most important thing you can tell people, again, is just don't do stupidity. When Google started, they've changed it drastically since, but when Google started, their mantra was, don't do evil. Now they swapped out to, destroy the world really quickly after that, but that was how it started. So don't do evil, and, if you just, as a leader in your business, if you just take the position that we don't tolerate this, we won't accept it, it's a non-starter, and if we catch you, we get rid of you, is probably the best operating guidelines.
Sadiq, do you have anything to add to what Ron said?
Well, I totally agree, right? I mean, if you're doing the wrong things, you need to be booted out, right? That's the thing. In our brokerage, like our protocol is very, very tight. Not a single commitment or document goes in front of a client unless I've reviewed it myself. We look for of the suitability, we look for the reasonability, we look for the proper disclosures, and every agent is trained that way. And in fact, when I say tight protocols, until I am fully confident that you understand every single aspect of your role as a mortgage agent or broker in how to explain to a customer the risks involved and all the steps that they need to take for their mortgage, you cannot submit a deal without my review. So they literally don't have the access to it. And I think that's what kind of keeps agents, an agent coming into a brokerage will hate that. Absolutely. I know somebody restricting your ability to do business like that the way you want to, but at the end of the day, it's a brand that I and my team have built. We're not going to risk that over somebody being, treating mortgages like the Wild West and doing whatever they want. Maybe not the Wild West. It's still a little bit Wild West, right? But we want to make sure that customers are protected. And as Ron said, it is that do no harm. And the best way to ensure that is you have to supervise, you have to monitor.
Which brings me to the challenge of what happens in larger brokerages. And if I can maybe ask Dong to put his principal broker hat on from his previous brokerage, what were some of the techniques that you use to handle misconduct and discipline in an environment where you have a lot of moving parts?
I always said, brokers are motivated by two things, either fear or greed. As a principal broker and one that holds a compliance hat, fear was oftentimes what we use as a means of trying to direct agents in a path of conduct culture. So, it's funny because when something bad happens, people get into this mode of hiding and not sharing, where we actually had the absolute opposite effect, where when something didn't go right the way it was supposed to, we actually cascaded it to the entire audience, because we want everyone to know that this is a consequence for poor behavior. So a good example might be we had an agent in Ontario do a transaction in New Brunswick where they weren't licensed. So I got a letter from the regulator from New Brunswick letting them know that if this happens again, the fine would be, I think it was $500,000 and another 10 grand for the agent that was involved. And I had no problem sharing that with all of our broker owners and agents, because to me, I get how hard it is to be a principal broker. I understand that you've got competing interests. I get that you have agents that are motivated and sometimes very difficult to manage because they're only focused on getting transactions done. And interprovincial transactions are one of those ones where what harm am I doing? And to me, it's giving, equipping our principal brokers with the information and case studies to be able to make and have those difficult conversations. So I had no problem, someone using me as a litmus test of here's what happens for the sake of doing those things. And the other thing we do is we have no problem when we have an agent that did something wrong to, in some cases, hang them from the square of the town to let everybody know this is what happens when you do wrong, right? And having a relationship with the regulators, I think, is also critically important, because I think when you become large and you have so many agents, it's like, I think it's easy to point out the one wrong person, but the simple reality is I think we've got a lot of really great agents and a few bad apples. And the best thing we can do is do the best we can to weed those bad apples out and work from that perspective. And I think, listen, as an industry, we're doing better with things like technology. And I think if somebody wants to behave poorly in this industry, then they're going to typically go to a place where there's less technology as opposed to more technology, because if you have a document portal where you're getting documents directly from the customer into your portal, you know exactly where that document came from. There's no nefarious acts happening, or it becomes a little bit more tougher to do. So I think a lot of these things are working in our favor to make us a better industry, but as an industry as a whole, in large brokerages, I think that's what we're doing to make things better.
Couldn't the people from New Brunswick fly to Ontario and then say they met you in your office? I'm kidding.
Try that.
I'm kidding.
They didn't buy it.
I'm kidding.
Which brings me to ask Ron, because I think you know that Ron doesn't put up with guff, from what you've heard of Ron. So I'd be interested, Ron, to hear if your experience is similar to what Dong's articulated. How did you deal with issues of misconduct and discipline in your own brokerage?
Well, in a brokerage that operates a salaried model, which is not very, very prevalent in Ontario or anyplace else, but in a brokerage with a salary model, people just have no choice but to do exactly what they're told to do, and so you set standards, and that's how it works. We used to have a few outside agents, and to Dong and everybody else's point, you just have to, particularly when they're new, you have to analyze the hell out of the compliance documents. You have to decide whether something's going on there that doesn't seem normal, that doesn't seem common, and take it more steps. I mean, it's always, at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm going to look at every file before it goes to the lender, but just maybe a few too many. But the reality is that if you look at your compliance documents from a holistic point of view, you will often find stuff that makes no sense at all. And if you're well-trained, you have a solid compliance group, they will say, well, wait a minute, why would this looks like a normal file. Why are they a B lender? Why is it a private mortgage? I mean, let's dig in deeper. And as long as you have that in your compliance group, you'll discover some things. You will.
So I think that raises a good point, because I think, what we run into is sometimes a little bit of information can be very dangerous. And Nick and I were having a conversation over lunch, and we're talking about, mix. And some of them have never done a foreclosure before or understand how to take somebody through a legal proceedings. I think there's a lot of brokers out there that have never really done a private mortgage or a B transaction and really understand the problems with it. And I think that's, I applaud FSRA for taking that first step forward of creating a licensing class so that you're getting a little bit more information. The challenge is when house prices are going up, everybody looked like a hero. Everybody looked like they knew exactly what they're doing, made wonderful underwriting decisions, and when property prices dropped and things happen, all of a sudden, as the one presenter said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming naked, and there's a lot of people swimming naked in this industry. And I think we have to work harder as an industry to just clean everything up. And I think we're getting there, but it's going to take time.
That's a horrible visual. Really tough. Thanks.
I just wanted to add into that, yes, it is a horrible visual.
Close my eyes, by the way.
We talk a lot about educating our agents and our brokers, training them. Premier Mortgage Center is a very large brokerage, more than over 170 agents and brokers across 5 provinces, but we're just speaking to Ontario right now, where there's a little over 90 agents and brokers. We've spent a lot of time not only training the agents and the brokers, but training the operational leadership as well. So when you speak about having locked in compliance procedures and policies, our individual staff that work in those departments, we're training them at all times as well. And many of them, one in particular came from a real estate background, but now probably knows more about mortgage brokering than she ever thought that she would have, right? But by training them and giving them the confidence and the information that they need to do their job well, right? Because they're salaried, Ron, right? They have no choice but to do what Carrie has told them to do. They are, in fact, educated enough to really find some of those, little pieces that we would be looking for that would send us searching for some answers as to why certain decisions were made in those files. Yeah.
So we've spent some time talking about the principal broker perspective. At this point, it would be interesting to hear from Antoinette in terms of the things that keep us, the regulator, up at night. What are the things that at the present time we're most worried about? I have the answer already, but and why is strong conduct culture and effective principal broker supervision so important at this particular time, Antoinette?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we are worried about, and I think we talked about it. One is really about proficiency of the sector, right? In the last 5 years, the sector has grown 20%. So we have 20% more licensed individuals, but the number of firms stay the same. So obviously from our perspective is many of those entering this sector might not have experienced a market downturn. So are these individuals proficient enough to be able to give that suitable mortgage advice? The other thing that we're also noticing is that consumer expectation has gone up. The reason why they use a mortgage broker is because they need assistance, they need help, they need that advice. And when you couple a market downturn uncertainty with higher consumer expectation, it just makes the work of the sector so much more important, right? So you need to be more diligent. You need to be, you really need to up your game to make sure that you understand a client's situation. I think a lot of us, we're all human. We like to think we're in better situation than we are. And when you have that expectation gap, that's when, as a broker, your job is harder. We do think that because of this environment, the risk of unsuitable mortgage advice and the risk that a client don't quite understand what is being offered to them is going to go up. So obviously we are going to be very focused on suitability, on what you're explaining, what are being explained to our consumers. And why a brokerage and a principal broker is so important in this environment is that you are a senior person within your organization, even if you're, like sometimes you're the owner, you set the direction. And we've all heard that, culture of a firm is always start from the top. From our perspective, if a principal broker is able to set that high standard of conduct and behavior, it makes our job easier. I mean, like any regulators, we don't have unlimited resources. We got to be able to focus our limited resources on the bad actors. So to the extent that we are seeing principal brokers, doing what they can, taking reasonable steps to set high standard of conduct and doing proper supervision, then we can divert our resources to the bad actors. We use the word conduct culture a lot, and I know this is a term that you start hearing from a lot of regulators, and if we have to summarize what it means for us, it's really about having a culture so that your organization, the people, they are always thinking about the consumer, the do no harm concept, right? When you are dealing with the consumers, you're thinking about what's best for them, how do we make sure that you are providing the right service. So be more proactive, because we will never have the resources to be able to check everybody, every transaction. And we don't want to do that. So we want to be able to leverage principal brokers and senior management of firms to be able to do that.
And so as a follow-up, I mean, not to try and scare people here or anything, I think people know kind of the usual basic disciplinary actions that can take place for individuals. But Antoinette, I was wondering if you could maybe articulate a bit for folks out there what are some of the regulatory consequences that can happen for a principal broker and their brokerage if their agents and brokers are found to be not dealing with consumers fairly and, more importantly, breaching the legislation?
So the first thing we always look at is whether the principal broker actually have a systematic process to monitor the conduct and supervise the agents. And some of these could include, are there proper training for their brokers and agents? Are there process to help you identify potential bad behavior or quality of service are not there? So I like to stress the quality of service. We do see a lot of firms that have a compliance process, but it's very checklist-based. Oh, all these documentation are there, but there is little focus on the content. Like, do my brokers and agents actually collect the right information? Did they make that link from the know your client information all the way to the final product recommendation? So we like to emphasize is the quality of those process. If you can demonstrate as a principal broker, you can demonstrate you have that systematic approach to monitoring the activities of your brokers and agents, you're giving them training. If you're identifying issues, you're actually dealing with it. We're all human, so there will be mistake. And it is okay to make mistake as long as you learn from your mistake and then you address them. So if you can demonstrate that, then that's very helpful. Now, if we notice that there is no process and your brokers and agents are found to be breaching requirements or treating consumers unfairly, then yes, a principal broker could be liable. It could be as simple as you are going to see us a lot more often, to license revocation or even conditions on your licensing, and sometimes we may ban somebody from being a principal broker.
Good to note. But you bring up an interesting topic, Antoinette, and I think this came up earlier in the conversation too. FSRA has seen a really rapid growth in the number of agents and brokers and not the same jump in the number of brokerages. So that means that brokerages are getting larger, and they were getting larger very quickly for a certain period of time there. So maybe I can ask Carrie, because I know you have a pretty big organization. How do you meet the challenge of being systematic, like Antoinette was talking about, making sure that there's oversight over your agents and brokers when you have so many additional bodies being onboarded. What are some of the techniques that larger growing operations can take to make sure that they've got their finger on the pulse and that they are having those kind of processes put in place like Antoinette just outlined in her remarks?
We start the process of, for lack of a better word, managing the agents and the brokers and their individual businesses from day one. So we are in 5 different provinces. We're specifically speaking to Ontario today, but you're right, the growth of agents and brokers inside of the brokerage is showing, but the number of brokerages remains the same. That's interesting to me, but it does make sense. So how do we manage through making sure that all of these 170 or 90 some odd Ontario businesses are running successfully and are compliant and are abiding by the rules and regulations within the industry? Well, we train specifically from day one to our policies and procedures manual, day one. We marry that with, I would call it, our own premier code of conduct and what we would consider, what we consider to be the standard of excellence for us. And we're very well known in the industry for that. We take advantage of tools, technology, different levels of expertise with certain agents and brokers that are within our industry that are very well known. We manage, as a principal broker, I not only manage the agents and the brokers, but we layer in. As we grow, we layer in. We have sales leadership, we have operational leadership. The more hands on deck, the better. And to Ron's point, his brokerage is, comprised of many salaried employees. These leadership roles are also salaried employees for us, so that there's no, there isn't a lack of balance in terms of what we require from them to help us make sure that these 170 or 90 some odd Ontario businesses are running effectively and efficiently, and which then means the brokerage is running in the same capacity. So, it starts with onboarding. Our operational staff are using management systems and technology to make sure that every single step that needs to happen with an agent or a broker when they come into Premier is happening. We make sure that the agents and the brokers know who within the brokerage they can answer to, they can ask questions to. It's a collaborative approach. It's not something that I can do on my own. I'm well aware of that, and I would never say that I could, right? It takes a village. So as we continue to grow, because Premier Mortgage Centre did start 18 years ago as, a handful of people, right? And today we're 170 strong and 14 staff, full-time staff, right, that are helping us manage and make sure that each of the agents and the brokers and how they're conducting business, that their business is strong so that we're strong.
It's funny because I think I always learn from my mistakes. And so I remember a few years ago, I think I got called 2 or 3 times from FSRA about a client complaint, usually private related, and they asked me if you could pull the file for me, and I couldn't find it. And it so happened that these 3 different agents had done transactions privately but got paid directly and didn't report it. So I'm like, man, this is really painful. If I get another call from the regulator and they ask me, can you look up this file? And if I have to say one more time, I did not know about it, at some point that excuse becomes a little bit muted. And then it's like, well, are you actually supervising? Like, what's going on there? So the one thing that we did internally is all of us as principal brokers have to file an annual information return. So I said, well, you know what? We're going to get all of our agents to file annual information returns to the brokerage. So we're going to ask questions like, were there any transactions that you did outside the brokerage where you got paid and didn't get paid through the brokerage? It's a pretty straightforward question. Do you have licenses in other disciplines that may be a conflict of interest to you as a mortgage brokerage? Please name them. So if I'm an insurance agent, let me know. So now I know that I've got a conflict of interest. Have you seen and read the last policy? These are all questions you can ask. And I think every brokerage has their own nuances. Ron being mostly salary people might be a little bit different. But to me, that became a very powerful tool because all of a sudden now, annually, I have to get every single one of my agents to be able to answer this question for me. And it's so funny because sometimes like, oh, I didn't know that this was the case. I'm like, no, it's freaking black and white, man. And then so it draws a conversation, and a lot of that problem disappears. So, if that's one practical example of how you as a principal broker want to run your brokerage to help you with those sorts of things, I think an annual information return, no different than the regulator asks of us principal brokers, ask of it of your agents, and you might be surprised at the response you get back.
Dong, 11 people online just said, you mean we can get the lawyers to pay us directly? Wow, that's a great idea. So you can't always control the way people think. So I got to say that.
Can I just add to it? Because I think that is great, right? Like I know we get asked a lot. What are the things that we need to do? Can you just give us a checklist? And we always said, we're not giving you a checklist, but definitely there's a lot of best practices out there. Like attestation is interesting, and then using management system and technology to help it's also very powerful. We heard this morning about AI. There's definitely a lot there that we can leverage. The one thing that we are deliberate in not setting out what to do is because every brokerage is different. There are a couple of things that I thought I'll put it on the table, because I know for other sectors, some firms like to use consumer reviews as a tool to identify, are there issues or are there things that we do really good at? That's good to emphasize. Some other do analyze the complaints data. Are there other complaints coming from specific pocket? Is there a systemic issue that we need to think about? So there are different ways to do it. We recognize that it's not going to be, checking every transaction all the time, because it's probably not necessary if you have somebody who's very, who has been in the business a long time and have seen the up and down of the sector. But for more junior agents, that's probably necessary.
I think I just wanted to add one more thing in there. One of a best practice that we use is we have an agent questionnaire. So much like a client would provide information to an agent or a broker when they're doing an application, we require this of our agents every year on their licensing renewal. So we're looking for them to answer questions about themselves, their businesses, which is our business, although they consider it theirs. And the information that they provide to us is really, really helpful in understanding where they are in their business or their personal life. There are some questions that many actually wouldn't want to answer. One of them that I specifically ask is whether or not they're in good standing with CRA. This is important to me as a broker owner. Those are issues that can lead to other issues. So, and if they choose not to answer that question, that's a whole other question. But again, managing as many agents and brokers, or supporting, let's call it supporting, as many agents and brokers in their businesses as I do, it's really important for me to make sure that I know exactly who these agents and brokers are as best as I can.
The CRA question would wipe out about 5 agencies, brokerages, right?
Yes, it would, Ron. But we
Maybe
all
10,
know
maybe
what
10.
it means when an agent or a broker is not in good standing, right? Just as you would ask your client, have you paid your taxes, right? Yeah.
And so improving conduct at your brokerages, it takes time, it takes effort, and this is a sales business, so it takes time away from your employees selling to be able to focus on things like making sure that they've done the KYC properly, et cetera. So Sadiq, does improving conduct culture in your brokerage, is it divisible from your bottom line, or does it support your bottom line? Does it improve, the reputation of your brokerage?
Well, a strong conduct culture definitely improves your reputation. The brokerage improves your reputation with your customers and with your lenders and with your brokerage, your team itself, right? I think, people who care about their business, care about their reputation, want to work with a reputable company. Consumers want to deal with a reputable company, and the lenders, they want to deal with reputable brokerages and agents. I find what it does support is, especially with the lender side of things, is lenders are willing to back you on that deal, that they can go either way with it, because they know your brokerage runs a tight ship. You got strong, good quality agents working for you, so they'll have your back on a decision to help a client where it could have gone the other way. What does it necessarily translate as measurable to your bottom line? You don't necessarily see increased revenue by having a stronger conduct culture because, as you mentioned, it takes away your time. As Carrie mentioned, there's cost of staffing and all that stuff. So there's an expense that's inherently there. The stronger you want to build your conduct culture, there's processes and technology and all this stuff you have to spend money behind. But where it does translate to a stronger bottom line, and I think a lot of times we don't recognize it because we don't see a revenue coming in, is that it protects you from losing the revenue you've made because of lawsuits and things that you have to now spend money on to fix problems that you could have avoided in the first place. And the way I consider a strong conduct culture is like an insurance policy on your revenue. If you have it in place, you're protecting the money you did earn, as opposed to just looking at it as, could I have earned more?
Does anyone have anything to add to that?
I would say, it's the age-old saying, if you tell the truth, then you don't need a memory, right? And, to Antoinette's point, if you do what's right for the customer, because I think that's really what conduct culture is, just do what's right for the customer. It was funny because I went on your website, Ron, because I was thinking, well, if Ron and I are going to sit together and he's going to beat me up about something and I'm going to come back and fight him. And your Google review ratings are spectacular. I think they're 4.87.
I haven't even started beating you up yet.
Yeah, no. I'm trying to platitude you. So I'm thinking, like, if you look at Ron's business as an example, what more is an example of doing the right thing because it resonates in the reviews from your customers. But if you do the right thing for your customers and then it finds a way back. The problem I do think that is as much as the people up here on stage and watching probably feel the same way, that doing the right thing and having the right conduct culture is good for your business, there's also a handful or more people out there that don't actually see the correlation. That taking that shortcut is better for my bottom line than doing the right thing about asking the right questions and sometimes saying no, and they can't say no. So I think that's a challenge. I think, as Sadiq said, it's not a direct correlation. If it was, then we wouldn't have a regulator and the industry would be really easy to manage. But the problem is we've got people out there that just don't feel that same way. And we got to find a way to root those people out and make sure the good people stay.
Yeah,
Well, I'd have to say that the key answer to that question is longevity. So I've seen people who've run very bad shops. They can't do it forever. They have to change or they get removed. And it's just as simple as that. So if you're planning on running a business for a very short time, doing bad things is an option. But if you want to run a business for a long time, sooner or later you have to come around to doing the right thing for the consumer. And that's just the way it is.
Do you think agents can bounce around and stay under the radar?
Different topic.
Sorry.
Good question.
So is the approach to this different depending on the size of your firm? So I know that there's people out there that are probably saying, well, I know if it's a small firm, you've got, you know who's working for you. You're probably looking at their deals before they get sent. But is this kind of an approach scalable depending on the size of your brokerage? Ron, I'm looking at you for an answer to this.
The attitude of the management is prevalent even at any scale, Carrie talks about a big operation, people all working from their homes or from offices, but not in her office, obviously. And they understand that it's consequential, that bad actions are consequential. Everybody understands it. Doesn't take long, even for newcomers, to understand it's consequential. So that's the essence of it all. If management cares and management radiates that concept that, you will get clipped if you do something wrong, and we only accept proper behavior, that is just known. And people will leave once they figure it, oh, well, I can't get away with anything here. I got to leave. I got to go. And consequentially, you end up with a pretty good group.
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Maybe Carrie, you have different approaches at your brokerage.
Ironically, no. It's the same approach. I think no matter how large the brokerage is, you have to have your agents and brokers aligned. Your leadership have to be aligned, management leadership, whatever title you're giving them. Everyone has to be in the alignment. We all have to be in the same circle. If you want to step outside the circle, then the circle's just going to get smaller, right? We're not going to have you as a part of that group, right? And we're all consistently walking forward together, right? So it shouldn't matter, I know at Premier, it shouldn't matter if you contact myself, you contact my business partner Dawn, or you contact Michelle Drover, who helps me run Atlantic Canada. You're going to get the same exact answer to a question, and that's really, really important. And I've never been afraid to communicate or to voice that, if I have to ask you a question, if I'm asking you a question and you're not willing to answer that question, or you're going to become defensive in some investigation or conversation that we need to have, right, then you're the issue, not me, right? This, again, the brokerage itself is a business, and it's a strong business. And without the brokerage, the agent, the brokers don't have a business. So we all have to work together. We all have to be aligned. There's no, I don't think there's, outside of the size of, call it the staff that I would have, and yes, I don't have them here in Ontario all working together. All of our staff are in Atlantic Canada, but they're all housed together. We're the same no matter how big or small you are.
Can I add something? Because one of the things that I keep hearing is that the good brokerages are trying to do right thing. But then agents and brokers who realize that, I'm under scrutiny, I'm just going to leave and find a brokerage that maybe have easier standard, right? So I think as a regulator, our role is really to, emphasize the importance and hold all principal brokers accountable. And one of the, going forward, I think a lot of our emphasis is going to be on onboarding and retention. What are principal brokers doing when you are onboarding a new broker and agent? Are you doing due diligence? Are you checking their compliance history? Are you, maybe checking their consumer review online? What are you doing to get you comfortable that somebody who's joining your firm is going to be living up to your expectation? We know the sector is not mature as other financial sectors, so I do have principal brokers who have come up to me to say, hey, Fisra, you license that individual, why should I check? And yes, and my comments has always been, because it's your business, it's your reputation. Mm-hmm. So, and then the other thing that we are also doing more, and I want to kind of maybe do a little pitches, is that a lot of times sectors know who are the bad actors. Regulators often don't know fast enough, and we do have a whistleblower program that allow people in the sector to report to us, and with so that we can protect them from consequences. So there is different tools that we're putting out there to support the sector, to let us know if there are misconduct, because if you give us credible information that we can act on, we will look at it seriously.
Dong, I think you had one more thing to add.
Yeah, it was funny because a couple years ago, I did a survey with all the provincial regulators across the country, and one of the questions I asked, answered this question, I said, do most of your problems happen in small brokerages or big brokerages? And the answer was, the truth is, it's even across the board, because if you run a small brokerage, you have small brokerage issues. Right? You've got a principal broker who's doing the payroll compliance, running their own transactions, trying to grow their business, and then you have a situation where you have a large brokerage where you have maybe shareholders and political issues and undue influence, and the bottom line's more important than compliance and all sorts. So I think every brokerage has its challenges and issues, and I think as a regulator, it makes it very difficult for these guys, which is how do you tailor the regulation to make sure that you move everybody from the continuum along so that we're all behaving well. And it's a tough thing, right? I think the struggles of a small brokerage is very different from the struggles of a large brokerage where you have 170 agents, where you have structure in place. So it's a really tricky thing. So I think that conduct culture, the compliance, starting from the beginning becomes really, really important, because as these things are legacy things. And if you have a legacy that starts off as being a bit of a shady brokerage, then sometimes that's hard to shake as you grow out. So do the right thing from the beginning.
Great way to end that discussion. Thank you, panelists. That was a really robust discussion on a very important topic. At this point, we're going to get some questions from the virtual audience or even our folks here that are plugged into the app. So we will ask you some questions from the audience as soon as they pop up on my screen here.
Screen is white.
The screen is white.
Takes a few seconds. There you go.
Anonymous.
Here we go. Anonymous.
There we go. Anonymous. They're scared. FISRA, what are the key leadership characteristics that a principal broker, principal representative, and leadership should have to support a strong conduct culture?
That is a great question. I would say two main things. One is integrity. I know a lot of people will say, oh, what is integrity? Integrity, you can really see from, it's that, customer-centric and understanding where you as a principal broker should be placed in a conflict situation and be able to remove yourself. So integrity is really important. Second thing that we look for is experience and competence. We know sometimes the title principal broker could seem vague, and some younger folks may get attracted to the title and want to be a principal broker. But from our perspective is, principal brokers do need to have that experience and the competence. They got to understand the sector. They got to understand the business challenges. They got to understand the regulatory requirements. They got to understand the customers. So, having that competence and having experience will be really important. And being, I would say, also not having the courage to do the right things and having the courage to acknowledge that, oh, maybe this is a new area. I need more education and more information, and go seek help.
Do any of the panelists have any views on what brokerages need to do to support a principal broker in making the right decisions and making strong conduct decisions in their day-to-day work, especially if, for example, they may not be an owner or a partner in the brokerage?
Well, I would suggest that one thing that no regulator, no principal broker, no compliance officer can easily manage is bad intentions. People start from a framework of bad intentions or become reckless and crazy in their approach to the business. It only tends to come out later. Now, that just means that the management of the brokerage has to be vigilant, has to care about what they're seeing in social media that the agent or broker is putting out. They have to think about what they're seeing. But, I'm a guy who actually talks to reporters from time to time, and the thing that I have to constantly remind them is that bad intentions are not something a regulator can easily control. If somebody sets out to do wrong, it's also something a principal broker, hopefully it's not the principal broker is doing wrong, but it's not as easy as people think. It's hard, and it just means that vigilance has to be the watchword of what you do, because those who set out to do wrong, they'll do some wrong before they finally get caught, and that's reality.
And hopefully someone will use the whistleblower provision to report them. Just saying.
Good plug.
Any other questions, Jenny, from the crowd? There we go. Anonymous, it's a question for Antoinette. As a financial institution that deals with brokers and agents, bad actors show up on occasion. Other than internally placing these brokers and agents on caution, what other recourses do FIs have on reporting improper activity, and what is the right course of action?
So thank you for this question. It does give me comfort that there seems to be an interest in reporting those to us. So there are right now, I would say, two main ways that this information can be reported to us. We just talked about the whistleblower program where you can, submit that information through there. The other channel is our regular complaints channel where you can, send in a complaints. There will be a form where you can outline, what are the observation, what are the information you've collected that suggest there may be misconduct. And that way we will come back to you and gather information so that we can get to the bottom of it. Are there misconduct? Are there breaches? And then we can address them accordingly.
Good stuff. Any other questions? Here we go. Another anonymous. Anonymous is active in this session. Have you discovered or used any best practices for automating good conduct? So using tech, are there easier ways to automate processes for your agents and brokers that lead to better outcomes and more compliant outcomes?
So I'll take the first stab at this. I think 100% using some level of technology makes fraud easier and sometimes harder. So it's a two-pronged approach. So the way I say this is I mentioned earlier, with all this advent of technology, there are document portals, there is tracking of documentation coming from customer directly to the broker. The form of those documents coming through are captured. You can see what happened to the documentation as it came through. So if you are interested in being a bad actor, then maybe being a part of a brokerage that has lots of technology becomes a little bit more difficult, or you're going to have to step up your game and play different games to game the game. There's all sorts of things. I remember 10 years ago, we put a mechanism within our compliance department where we could actually look up employers. So I might look up Sadiq, and I might put in PetSmart as an employer. And if Sadiq happens to have 4 or 5 customers with PetSmart as the employer, that might raise a bit of a red flag to me that maybe some of these employment letters are not legitimate. Maybe they're fraudulent, because what is the likelihood that Sadiq's done 5 transactions for employees of PetSmart? So, and then you can look at them and go, the job letters are a little bit off. And I think with the advent of open banking and with better sharing of information with CRA and things like that, I think we'll get to a place where a lot of this becomes a lot more difficult to do. But like anything, technology will evolve, and as much as we're leveraging good technology, the bad actors are also leveraging it to do what they need to do. So I think at the end of the game, it's just a race, but I do think that technology, it will play a bigger role in making sure that we all behave well, and if you do choose to play nefariously, then you'll go somewhere else to do it.
Just, they were all family members working.
Yes, of course, I know. That's why he has his own brokerage now.
I will say, though, that linkage to CRA for income verification will put a serious dent in any fraudster's ability to do that stuff. So that's something we got to have. We just keep pushing for it. We never stop. Just keep after it. Someday it'll happen. Someday.
So this is an idea that some have suggested is technology can be used to analyze a lot of data, right? You can use that to analyze other anomaly. Why is this particular agent just seems to be doing so much more deal when he or she is the youngest? Like, I think identifying that anomaly that is just not seem unreasonable is a way to help you to target where you need to spend your time on. It's something that is not a secret. As a risk-based regulator, we do that too, is try to look for anomaly, look at where seems to be the highest risk area, and then it helps us target our resources. So that's definitely, it's what some has told me as use of technology and automation.
Okay, so I think this might be our last question. We'll see. When I try to implement a new compliance measure, standard document, or other process, my agents push back saying they're independent contractors, so I shouldn't be so controlling or monitoring. How do we bridge the gap in understanding that supervision and compliance expectations are no different regardless of whether they are salaried or contractors?
I'll start with that one. I've heard that many times. So yes, a mortgage agent or broker will say, well, I'm an independent contractor, but you cannot operate without being under a brokerage. So the way I approach this, my sandbox, my rules, okay? So reality is if you don't like it, by all means, there's the door, just show yourself out. You're independent, you can go. But the reality, the approach that I take with it, showing them is like, and I love that FSRA has the enforcement page. I weekly will go on there and pull up anything that's new and send that out to my team. And here is, and I'll relate it to why we have a process in place. Here's something that somebody did wrong. FSRA, took action. Here's the penalty. Here's $140,000 in penalty that they got hit with. And here's how our documentation, our process, or our policy protects you from being on that page. And that's how I related back to them. And in the beginning, it was always that kind of like, well, I want to run my business how I want to run my business. No problem. By all means, go get your mortgage, your principal brokerage license, go open your own brokerage, and go to town on it. But if you're going to be part of my brokerage, this is how we're going to do it, and here's the reason why. I am taking this extra step to protect you and your business so that you are going to be, as Ron mentioned, it's longevity. You're going to be in this business longer because of these processes, because of these steps, because of the standardization of documentation that makes sure you don't miss something when dealing with a client.
I guess my first comment would be if a principal broker is the person asking that question, the appropriate comment is grow a spine. Nothing else is relevant after that.
So it's funny because one thing that I used to deal with all the time was brokers and agents wanting to advertise themselves as their own entity, right? They all have personal service corps, so it's Ron's Mortgages as an example, and I tell the story. I go, years ago, I had an agent who wanted to go out and create his own brand, and so he created a company, Ron's Mortgages Inc., and he decided that he was going to put it on all his letterhead, including the brokerage letterhead. And one day they made a mistake on quoting the prepayment penalty, and sure enough, a lawsuit incurred. So the simple reality was in this lawsuit, the brokerage was named, Ron Butler was named as the agent, and Butler Mortgages Inc. was also named. But the problem was the E&O insurance only covered the brokerage and the individual, but not this entity. So it was the most awkward situation because we had to go to court and discoveries, and the individual had to get his own lawyer to protect his corporate entity. Yet we had an E&O person representing the individual and the brokerage, of which at the end of the day we came up with a settlement, of which everybody paid a certain sum. But it's a very awkward scenario, and I tell these stories because to me it's like, if you want to go down this road and you want to do these sorts of things, then this is a consequence. Like you're going to be named in a suit, and you have absolutely no coverage, and you're going to get screwed. So why do you want to go down this road? So it's funny, but to this, to Ron's point, to grow a spine. It is very true that I think as the principal broker, you have to have, I think Antoinette said this, you need to do the right thing, you need to have integrity, and you need to make sure that the things that you're doing is in the best interest of the entity in which you're serving, and not to fall into the trap of doing what your agent wants to do because they're a big producer and they call the shots.
Sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
Sorry, I'll add into that. Obviously, we deal with a lot of agents and brokers in different provinces as well. Courage is another key word that comes to mind for me. I'm not a very scary person, but I can be. And, we approach the licensing renewal as an opportunity for an agent to stay or go. Instead of, I really do like Sadiq's approach, sending out FSRA communications or other principal brokers who are sharing information of a situation that they've gone through. You can send out the communications of the did you knows that this could happen or this has happened. I tend to use the annual renewals as an opportunity for me to interview the agents all over again, making sure that they are strong and stable in who they are as a body, because they're actually a business in themselves, which is a smaller part of who we are. But I also use that time to communicate what's coming. right? What changes is Premier Mortgage Center going to be making within the brokerage? And it opens lines of communication for feedback, although I may not welcome any of it. It does keep the line of communication open, but it also gives the agent an opportunity to say, you know, I'm not interested in having to, you know, operate in this way moving forward, and FSRA can back me up on this one. There are licenses that we don't renew. That's okay. It's okay. Sadiq and I were speaking about this earlier today, where if there ever comes a time where I am more concerned and focused on your business than you are, then we have an improper imbalance and it's time for us to part ways.
Yeah, and just to add to Carrie, like, you know, every year I do at least once a year, I'll have a mandatory compliance meeting where everybody has to attend. They're given a 2 months notice. So whatever else you've got going on in your life, you better sort it out and be there, because if you're not there, your license isn't getting renewed. Okay? And that's the meeting. So next Monday is my meeting, and I bring everybody up to date on everything that's happening in the brokerage, where the direction we're going, all that good stuff, and also anything new that we're implementing because of trends in the industry or things that we're seeing. And again, that I have one for sure every single year, with my mandatory one just coming up to renewal, and then I'll also, if needed, have other mandatory ones throughout the year if things are evolving a little bit faster, if there's more changes regulatorily or anything I have to bring them up to. But the rule is if you don't attend this, you're gone, because mandatory is mandatory. And if you don't like it, don't show up, but just you're also not going to be part of this brokerage, because I don't want that liability on my shoulders.
So it looks like the last question, Antoinette, is for FSRA. FSRA is being put on the spot. Does FSRA have specific expectations or guidelines for compliance? How do brokerages know if their compliance procedures being handed down to their agents or brokers are meeting FSRA's expectations?
So we're doing a few things. I think some of you have heard us talked about this before. We are going to be putting out guidance for principal brokers and brokerages, just to set out what are the things that we would be expecting a principal broker to do, you know, from onboarding, training, all the way to addressing compliance issues. So that's coming up. Other things that we are looking at doing more is, you know, communicating best practices. We have put out semi-annual newsletters starting maybe a couple of years ago, so that's going to continue. So there's going to be information there. As we notice best practices that came out from the sector, we want to share that with all of you. So that's another useful tool. Other things that we are going to do more going forward is through either webinars or training to identify topics that may be of interest to the sector, to principal brokers. So if there are topics that you're interested in, do let us know. We will make sure that we find ways to address some of your questions. And you're going to hear more from us about upcoming training or webinars or sessions.
Great. Chris, we're not allowed to do this, but I'll make the exception.
Okay, question for the market participants. What do you feel are the biggest challenges with respect to the AML rates?
Do you want to repeat the question for
I'll repeat
audience?
it. So from the audience, someone asked if the industry participants can share with us what are some of the greatest challenges with implementing the new anti-money laundering, terrorist financing requirements that FINTRAC has put in place.
Okay, so I'll take that first. One element of it is ridiculous. If you're doing a mortgage with a bank, or you're doing a mortgage with a CMHC NHA lender, they have to meet all those compliance guidelines themselves. So we're actually just duplicating our efforts on 90% of the files. It's just pure duplication. It's a pure expense on the brokerage. Now, if FINTRAC had spent even 30 seconds doing rational consultation with the industry, they would have realized that you only need to track the private mortgage money. That's it. That's the only place. If every other entity is doing this work already, why, I get the belt and suspenders idea, but please, it's too much. If the Bank of Nova Scotia and TD Bank can't report properly to FinTrek, we're probably going to do a worse job.
Right.
So in the end, the private money needs to be meticulously reviewed, because that's where all the evil doing goes on, is in the private space in terms of AML. And I've seen it, I've observed it. I've observed what some brokerages have done. But creating a whole regime to have us duplicate something that banks and NHA, CMHC lenders are doing already, it just never made any sense to me.
The other part to that too is I've had conversations with FinTrack over it, is that they have not provided any details of how to report, when to report, how often to report, what method of reporting, any of that. So it's like, how is a brokerage, especially, that to Ron's point, when 90% of your business is institutional and they already have those processes in place, and we're now just duplicating efforts for that other 10%, it's a big cost, and you still haven't provided any framework for how are we supposed to implement that. It's kind of like, I might as well just be shooting in the dark here, because how do I report that to you if you haven't given me a framework and a methodology and a format in which you want to see it, right? And I think that's kind of the problems that brokerages will face until something systematic is put in place by FinTrack.
I think like most things, it's going to take time to flush out. What brings me the biggest fear is if you look at the AML penalties that have been levied so far, it brings a chill to my spine, and I'm thankful that I'm not in the business anymore from that perspective, because there's real estate firms that have had big fines levied against them. Like, this stuff isn't $5,000 fine. This is like 50, 100. Like, this is big money. So I think to Ron's point, we don't quite understand how it's all going to work out, because I think, to Ron's point, the truth is if you do an institutional transaction, then they're going to do the work anyways, and they probably will do a better job than us. But if we're doing business with mixed and private lenders, then we better get our act together and make sure we're doing the right thing. And to some extent, I do think that the industry probably has turned a blind eye, because the truth is you might have sent the deal to Home Trust or Equitable Bank and got a list of requirements that came back and said, oh, I don't need to provide this if I go to a MIC or a private lender, and off it went. And all those banks and lenders were doing was following AML rules. So all we've done is we level the playing field, and we all have to do the right level of due diligence, especially on private and MIC transactions. So for principal brokers who've got agents playing in that space, I think the responsibility has grown leaps and bounds, and it's going to take some time before people have all sort of graduated to the level of expectation, because there's a lot of MICs out there that are very small, and I don't know that I trust them to do all the work. But there's some bigger ones that I have a better relationship with. But those are the kind of things I think we're just now at a point where we can't rest on somebody else. We're just going to have to do the work ourselves, especially on MIC and private transactions.
So I think we're at our last question. It seems like everything is on the PB. What about other management or directors or officers of the corporation? What is their responsibility and liability?
Can I take this one? That is a great question, and I think it's a misunderstanding of the sector. There are, in fact, liability provision within our statute that deals with all directors and officers. And one of the things that we're attempting to do with our upcoming guidance is to outline, what are our expectations on management of the brokerage, in addition to the principal brokers, especially in cases where the principal broker is not an owner, they don't have direct control over the whole business. So that's where we want to emphasize that they play a role. They have a responsibility to make sure that whoever they appoint as the principal broker have the capability and the capacity to do it. They also have the responsibility to make sure that they are supporting their principal brokers so that they can do the job effectively. So we're going to clarify that, because that is an excellent question. And that was also one of the reasons why it is such a difficult job for principal brokers.
Great. Well, we have almost run out of time. Thank you very much, panel. This was really great content, great discussion. I hope the folks online have enjoyed it as much as the folks that are here. I do want to take a few moments because my licensing colleagues gave me a bit of a poke earlier, and they said, you know, you got to get this message out. Want to remind everyone that the deadline to renew your license is approaching really fast. So if you want to keep arranging private mortgages for your clients, you need to have completed two things. One, your private mortgage course, and two, your continuing education course. So please remember that you need to do these things before renewing your license by the March 31st deadline. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for the excellent discussion that the panel gave us. I hope that you found this session helpful. Please do take some time to fill in the conference survey on the conference website. It's under the heading of feedback, and it's on the lobby homepage. After this session concludes, there will be more discussion and, more importantly, some light food and a cash bar out in the lobby, so hopefully we can continue the conversation out there. In the interim, thank you again, folks. This was a really great conversation, and I think everyone that's here got something different and exciting out of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.